I caught up with an old mentor of mine last week. You know the type. He's the guy who followed the traditional playbook to the letter. For 20 years, he grinded out 60-hour weeks, paid off the mortgage, put the kids through private school, and basically erased his own hobbies to build this fortress of stability for his family. You look at him and think, this man has earned his keep. But then he told me the industry turned. He got a pink slip, and the steady stream of resources just dried up overnight. Now, logically, you'd expect that after 2 decades of sacrifice, he would have built up a massive reservoir of goodwill, like a savings account of love that he could draw from during a rough patch. But as he sat there shaking his head, he described the exact opposite. He didn't get support. He got immediate coldness. The moment the money stopped, the relationship started dying. He looked at me with this genuine, painful confusion and asked, "Doesn't my history count for anything?" It was heartbreaking because he viewed it as a supreme betrayal. But as I listened, I realized I wasn't looking at a moral failure, but a biological one. There is a ruthless theory that explains exactly why his 20 years of history meant absolutely nothing the moment his utility dropped. A law of nature that suggests we aren't loved for what we did, but strictly for what we can do right now.
That's a tough story. And it's just a perfect, really agonizing illustration of this conflict we see playing out all the time. You know, this fight between what we feel is historical loyalty, our past contributions, and this cold, hard, present utility.
Right, and you said ruthless theory. That's what I was thinking. It feels like there's something almost mechanical at play.
Exactly. And the theoretical concepts we've looked at, they are designed really to get right at that painful scenario, to explain that immediate reevaluation of a partner's value.
So that's the mission for this deep dive, and we're going to explore all of it, the sociological, the psychological, and even the legal frameworks that try to define what value even means in a modern partnership.
And what's so fascinating is how these old, really cynical theories suddenly connect with very modern, very real data about divorce and gender roles.
We want to move past just the story, the anecdote, and really understand why a person's history can suddenly seem to mean so little when the resources stop.
Yeah, and what happens when those very old school gender expectations just collide head on with 21st century economic reality?
Okay, so where do we start?
I think we have to see this as a kind of funnel. We start at the widest, maybe the harshest part with these controversial theories of human mating. Then we narrow it down and test them against actual large-scale divorce data.
And then at the end of the funnel?
At the end, we look at the systems that have to clean up the mess, the psychological impact, and the legal structures that process the fallout when these relationships end. We're really looking for the mechanism behind that coldness your mentor felt.
Let's start right at the bottom then. The most cynical possible explanation for all of this idea that gets thrown around called Bruffault's law.
Okay, but we have to introduce this with a major grain of salt, a lot of caution. It comes from the writings of Robert Bruffault, who died back in 1948.
And he wasn't just a sociologist or an anthropologist.
Not at all. And this is really important for you to keep in mind. He was also a surgeon and a novelist, so critics, especially, modern anthropologists, they're very quick to point out that his work on this topic just doesn't have the rigorous validation. It lacks the cross-cultural support that would make it a real sociological law.
So it's more of a theory, a controversial idea.
A very polarizing theory. It has a pretty shaky academic foundation, to be honest.
Okay, noted. But academics standing aside, the core idea itself is, well, it's profoundly aggressive, almost brutally transactional. What's the fundamental premise?
The core tenet, and it's put in very blunt terms, is that the female determines all the conditions of the animal family.
The female determines everything.
Yes, and that any association with the male only happens. It only takes place if the female can derive a benefit from that association.
Wow. So it positions the entire relationship as this ongoing exchange. The man's value is just what he can provide right now.
Solely his present utility to the female, and this is the crucial part, to her offspring. It's about survival and advantage, nothing else.
And it gets worse, right? The corollaries that spin off from this idea, they're the parts that just strip away any notion of loyalty or, emotional history.
They are incredibly stark. The first one gets right to the heart of what your mentor experienced. It says that past benefits accrued from a man are no guarantee of a continuing relationship.
So his 20 years of 60-hour weeks, the mortgage, the school fees, all of it is just wiped out the second he can't provide new benefits.
That's the theory. It's a cash-based system, not a credit-based one. Your history is irrelevant.
The savings account of love is a myth.
According to this law, yes. The contract is only about the present, and the second corollary just doubles down on that. It says that if a woman promises a man future loyalty, future continuation, in exchange for a benefit she gets today.
Let's say he uses his bonus to pay off all the debt.
Perfect example. The moment that benefit is rendered, the moment the debt is paid, her promise becomes null and void. The debt is settled, and the relationship contract has to be immediately renewed based on his next projected benefit.
So that act of providing doesn't buy him loyalty for the next year. It just resets the clock.
It wipes the slate clean for the next negotiation. That is the interpretation, yes.
Unbelievable. What's the third one?
The third one deals with promises of the future. It says a man's promise of a future benefit has very limited weight.
Okay, how so?
Its value depends on only two things: how short the wait for that benefit is, and how much trust the woman has in his ability to actually deliver.
So a vague promise of, don't worry, we'll be rich when I retire in 30 years.
Carries almost no weight compared to, say, an immediate promotion or a bonus that's coming next month. And that weight drops even more if he's failed to deliver on promises in the past.
So when you look at my mentor's story through that cold, hard lens, his heartbreak isn't a personal betrayal anymore. It's just a calculated risk assessment.
He became a liability. His future benefits were projected to be zero, and so the association was terminated. It is a ruthless, and I agree, a deeply depressing framework.
Which is why, I assume, it attracts so much criticism. You can't propose a theory like that without getting a serious pushback.
Oh, absolutely. The pushback is immediate and fierce, and we have to address the strong feminist critique here. The law is often described as just inherently misogynistic, sexist, and, well, the phrase used is hypergamy dressed up in scientific language.
Dressed up to do what, exactly?
To attack female agency, to reduce women to a caricature. The critics argue that this theory portrays all women as fundamentally selfish, coldly calculating animals who just exploit men for gain.
Constantly running the numbers on their partner's utility.
Yes, and ready to discard them the moment that value drops. It completely ignores the vast spectrum of other reasons for partnership. Love, companionship, emotional support, shared history.
All the things we like to think matter.
All the things that make us human. This theory reduces partnership to a spreadsheet.
But the people who defend it, or at least entertain it, they point to modern life. They say, look at the statistics.
They do. Proponents often point to the high rates of relationship termination in developed economies. And especially, they lean on that statistic, which is sometimes disputed but often cited, that divorces are overwhelmingly initiated by women.
And they see that as proof.
They see it as empirical evidence that utility, not loyalty, is the real determining factor in relationship longevity for many women.
But there's a really important counter-argument to this, isn't there? One that stops this from just being a one-sided attack.
A critical one. It complicates the narrative that this kind of ruthless abandonment is purely a female phenomenon.
This is the great divorce and health issue.
Exactly. One of the most potent counter-arguments points to what happens when health fails. There are studies suggesting that men are statistically more likely to leave a spouse who's been diagnosed with a severe illness like cancer than women are to leave a sick husband.
So the ruthless assessment of utility abandoning someone when their function drops, it's not exclusive to one gender.
It suggests that if this ruthless law exists, it might be a human law of self-interest. A trigger that gets pulled when a partnership becomes primarily a burden, and it doesn't matter which partner is feeling that strain.
Okay, so the calculation exists, but it's too simple to say it's just one gender strategy. This brings us to the broader concept that this law is trying to get at, which is hypergamy.
Right. Hypergamy is basically the formal term for this. The tendency to seek romantic partners of a higher status, more resources, or a higher social rank. It's the idea of marrying up.
And there are two competing explanations for why this happens.
Two very different models, yes. And we need to look at both.
Let's start with the one that feels closer to Bruffault's law, the evolutionary model.
The evolutionary model defines hypergamy as an intrinsic, a built-in female mating preference, a preference for partners with demonstrably higher status or more resources.
And this is supposed to be hardwired into our biology.
The argument is that it was shaped by deep evolutionary pressures. For our female ancestors, picking a mate with more resources or higher status meant better protection, better food, and ultimately higher survival rates for her and for her children.
And there's some famous research that backs this up.
There is. The landmark cross-cultural studies from David M. Buss, starting back in the late 80s. He looked at 37 different cultures and consistently found that women prioritize resource acquisition and financial stability in a partner far more than men did.
Which seemed to cement the idea that this preference for a good provider is evolved. It's part of our programming.
According to this model, yes, it's hardwired to ensure reproductive success.
But that raises a big question for me. If it's pure biology, why don't all women leave the moment their partner has any kind of setback? Why do we see stable, long-term marriages where the income is low?
And that is a perfect, powerful challenge to pure biological determinism. It leads us straight to the other side of the argument, the social structural model.
The sociological view.
Yes. This model says hypergamy isn't a biological imperative at all. It's a socially constructed pattern that gets reinforced by things like class, power, and the structure of society itself.
So from this perspective, why do women marry up?
It's seen as a rational choice within a stratified world. Thinkers like Claude Lévi-Strauss or Pierre Bourdieu argued that marriage systems have historically been designed to maintain class inequality.
How so?
Well, in a patriarchal society where a woman's own access to wealth, power, and education is systematically limited, her desire for a higher status partner isn't some deep biological urge. It's a pragmatic response to a rigged system.
So she's just making the best possible move on the board she's been given.
Precisely. If the system tells you that your best shot at security and stability for your children comes through the resources of a male partner, then marrying the one with the most resources becomes the logical survival strategy. It's not an innate preference, it's a reaction to the structure. The difference between those two is everything.
And this leads to all the major challenges against that strict biological determinism argument.
It does. The claim that women are just rigidly wired to seek status, it faces some really significant scientific and logical problems.
Okay, what's the first big piece of evidence against it being a fixed trait?
The first is strategic flexibility. I mean, human mating strategies are not fixed. They're incredibly plastic. They respond to the environment, to culture, to your stage in life.
So a woman might want different things at different times.
Exactly. She might prioritize resources if she's looking for a long-term partner to raise a family with, but she might prioritize, say, genetic quality or just fun for a short-term relationship. That flexibility really undermines the idea of one single fixed biological program.
So if the culture changes, the preference should change too.
Yeah.
If women gain economic power.
The preference for hypergamy should decrease, and that is exactly what the data shows, which is the second major challenge.
Go on.
Cross-cultural data shows huge variation. In more egalitarian societies, hypergamy is often weak or it's just absent. You see a lot of status matching, marrying someone at your own level, or even hypogamy, which is marrying down. This suggests social roles and economic structures are way more powerful than some ancient biological wiring.
The economic argument seems like the strongest nail in the coffin for pure biological determinism.
I think it is. It's critical. In places where economic and legal equality improve, where women get real access to education, to capital, to their own careers, the measured preference for marrying a wealthier, higher status man goes down significantly.
And if it were truly hardwired, it wouldn't matter if she was ZCU or not. The preference would still be there.
It should persist regardless of her own economic status. The fact that it declines with her empowerment strongly suggests it was a structural survival tool for centuries, not an innate drive.
We also have to point out that men aren't, immune to this idea of marrying up themselves, just in different ways.
Absolutely. The evolutionary model often just ignores this. Men exhibit their own form of hypergamy. They prioritize things that signal reproductive fitness in a partner, like youth, beauty, perceived fertility, or even social capital.
So they are also selecting for their own version of high status.
Exactly. Both sexes are choosy. Both are seeking utility. It's just that historically, they've been seeking different kinds.
And the final point about our own evolution as a species.
Right. The whole model of depending on one single high-status male provider, it doesn't really fit with what we know about early human evolution. We evolved with cooperative breeding, shared parental care, kin support. That was the strategy. Relying on one guy would have been an incredibly high-risk, inefficient way to raise children.
So the theory's a bit shaky, but it still resonates. My mentor's story proves that when the money dries up, stability is threatened. So let's pivot from theory to the modern data. What is the hard empirical reality?
The whole economic landscape of marriage has fundamentally changed, and it's mostly because of education. Since about the 1990s in the U.S., female educational attainment has actually surpassed male attainment.
creating a situation where women are now more likely to be the more educated partner.
Exactly. The old pattern of educational hypergamy man has more education is being replaced by educational hypogamy where the wife has more.
And this goes completely against the grain of that traditional male breadwinner ideology.
Completely. And it led to a very clear hypothesis for researchers. If those old gender rules still matter, then these hypogamous marriages should be at a much greater risk of divorce.
So let's get to the findings. Does the hard data actually confirm that? Is there a measurable risk when a woman out-educates her husband?
The large-scale U.S. study it's really revealing. They looked at 109,000 couple years of data from these big government surveys, spanning from 1996 all the way to 2017.
And it was a rigorous study, right? They controlled for other factors.
Very rigorous. They had to isolate the effect of just the educational pairing from everything else. Income, race, age at marriage, whether as a first marriage or not.
Okay, so what did they find? What is the risk?
They found that the higher risk for these hypogamous couples is real, it's significant, and it's enduring. Couples where the wife had more education had an annual odds of divorce that was 31% higher than couples where education was equal or where the husband had more.
31%. That is a massive difference.
It's a huge differential, and it's a risk tied specifically to the educational structure of the partnership, even after you account for all those other factors.
So structural roles still have this powerful, almost gravitational pull on a marriage's stability, even now.
It seems so. And when they projected that risk out over the entire life of a marriage, say 40 years, the instability was still there. They predicted that almost half of all hypogamous marriages, 48%, would end in divorce.
Compared to what for the other groups?
Compared to 41% for the homogamous and hypergamous unions. So that 7 percentage point gap confirms it. Marrying in a way that defies the traditional male provider model still carries a measurable, statistically verifiable penalty for stability.
The conclusion from that is pretty bleak. It sounds like the gender revolution has kind of stalled out.
Or is, at best, unfinished. That's the interpretation. While women have absolutely embraced educational and professional equality, the social and psychological expectations on men and on the marriage structure itself just haven't kept pace.
So things like a man losing his job or being underemployed.
Yeah.
Those are still powerful predictors of divorce because they just clash with our deep cultural narrative of what a partnership should look like.
Exactly. And the strength of this study is that it uses very recent, very extensive data, and it confirms that even though these hypogamous marriages are more common now, they haven't gotten any less fragile. The risk is robust.
Looking deeper into that data, when is a marriage at its most vulnerable? Is there a specific danger zone?
Yes, and it's a consistent pattern across all types of marriages. The annual risk of divorce rises really steeply. It hits a peak at around 3 years of marriage, and then it steadily declines after that.
The 3-year mark. That makes intuitive sense. The honeymoon is over, maybe kids are arriving, and the real-world tests of money and partnership really begin.
It's where the romantic ideal smacks into the operational reality of daily life. But what's interesting is that while 3 years is the peak for everyone, the risk line for hypogamous couples is just consistently higher all the way through.
Did the research point to any other major risk factors?
It did. Remarriage was a big one. Across the board, remarriages are substantially riskier. The odds of divorce were about 1.74 times higher than in first marriages.
And it's less about gender roles, more about the complexity of second families.
Probably. Existing children, financial entanglements. It makes the institution itself more fragile.
And there was also a finding about the wife's education level, just on its own.
Yes, her overall educational attainment acts as an independent protective factor. The higher her education, the lower the risk of divorce. Compared to wives who were college graduates, wives with less than a high school education faced odds of divorce that were 1.64 times higher.
So her own economic status, her own access to resources, it acts as a buffer against instability.
It seems to. It provides both greater personal autonomy and likely contributes to a higher quality of life within the partnership itself, making it more stable.
Okay, so the data confirms that these traditional earning roles are still deeply tied to stability. But what happens on the human level when those norms get broken? When the woman becomes the primary breadwinner, this moves us from the sociological data to the individual psychological cost.
Right. And when you look at the psychological literature, this disruption of the traditional income hierarchy, when the partner pay gap reverses, it often creates a genuine identity crisis for men, which is exactly where your mentor was heading even before he got laid off. The threat was there, and the layoff just made it real.
The male identity has been, for centuries, just tied so tightly to this idea of being the provider. When that crumbles, what's the immediate psychological fallout?
It manifests as a profound identity threat. We see men experiencing a measurable drop in self-esteem. It can lead to this pervasive insecurity, sometimes resentment, especially when their female partner surpasses them in income or career prestige.
A feeling of inadequacy.
A deep sense of inadequacy, because the cultural script for masculinity tells them they are supposed to be the financial leader. When they're not, their whole framework for self-worth is challenged.
And this isn't just feeling a bit down. The research shows it can have a serious impact on mental health.
Oh, the effects are clinical. Studies show men's life satisfaction measurably declines as their female partner's earnings go up past their own. They report more stress, more anxiety, and actual symptoms of depression.
And how does that manifest in the relationship?
Often as emotional withdrawal, or sometimes hostility. It can be directed at the source of the perceived threat, which is the successful partner. The withdrawal isn't just sadness, it's a defense mechanism against that feeling of being less than.
Have researchers observed any other specific behaviors in these situations?
They have. Things aimed at restoring that lost status. This can be subtle stuff like minimizing the wife's career achievements in public or cutting back on their share of housework to sort of subconsciously assert that her job is less important than her home duties.
So passive resistance.
In some cases, yes. And in more extreme cases, there's even evidence that men in this situation engage in higher risk financial behaviors, like risky investments, to try and catch up and reassert their dominance.
And this all gets more complicated with kids, right?
It does. Even couples who start out with really egalitarian goals often fall into traditional patterns when the first child arrives. The woman takes on the primary caregiver role. The real crisis hits when she goes back to work and then starts to rapidly out-earn him. The very role he took pride in is now threatened, and that's when you can see that emotional detachment or resistance really kick in.
So that's the psychological toll on men. What about the economic reality for women when these marriages fall apart? The financial gap is still huge.
It is stark. It is persistent. Divorce has a consistently punishing effect on women's financial stability compared to men's. And this is despite decades of attempts to reform family law.
Let's get into the specific numbers on that gap.
The numbers are alarming. Studies consistently find that women's incomes drop after divorce, somewhere in the range of 12% to 30%. It can be a major source of downward mobility.
And for men?
For men, their incomes frequently increase after divorce, sometimes by as much as 31% to 36%, and as a result, the post-divorce poverty rate for women is nearly 3 times that of men.
Why? Why does that gap still exist? I mean, even if she played the traditional role, shouldn't the legal system compensate her for that sacrifice?
That's what it's supposed to do. Family law scholars have traditionally blamed this gap on her adherence to those gender roles. The career breaks, specializing in caretaking, working fewer hours. The core issue is the sacrifice of career capital.
Explain that. What is career capital?
It's her long-term earning potential. By specializing in the home, she enables her husband to specialize completely in his career. His earnings trajectory goes way up. When the marriage ends, the law often fails to adequately value her non-economic contributions, the homemaking, the support.
And it definitely fails to compensate her for the earning potential she lost forever.
Exactly. She's penalized twice. Once for sacrificing her career for the family's overall good, and a second time when the marriage ends because the law just undervalues that sacrifice. The system sees the current assets, but it fails to see the permanent loss of future earning capacity she incurred. And that is a massive intangible marital asset that just evaporates.
Amid all these grim statistics, it's probably important to look at how people actually rebuild. The recovery path itself seems to show a real shift in how people view marriage.
It does. We have an anecdote that illustrates this. A story of very rapid recovery from a man who went through a profound betrayal.
Wow.
He posted on a forum, said he was cheated on, went through a horrible divorce, but he ended up with 50-50 custody of 2 very young kids, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. His recovery was just intense focus. He threw himself into his work and into his children.
And it worked.
He rebuilt his life very quickly. He met a new partner he called amazing. And his advice to others was really powerful. He said, "This isn't the end for you. This is the end of a mess you got yourself in." He basically turned betrayal into a catalyst for self-improvement.
But that same forum showed the other side of it, the cynicism that this whole process creates.
Yes, a powerful shift away from the legal institution of marriage. We saw another man who said he found an awesome lady, a great partner, but refused to get married again.
What was his exact quote?
He said, definitively that despite how great she was, he cannot see getting married again. And this reflects a really widespread trend. For many people who've gone through the pain and the expense of a modern divorce, the legal contract itself is seen as a huge liability, not a source of security.
So they want the partnership, but not the legal paperwork.
They want the family, the shared life, but without the legal risk that the modern system seems to carry.
Which brings us to that system. The moment a relationship ends, all of this subjective emotion crashes into the cold, structured world of family law. Let's talk about how courts try to assign value.
In common law places, the goal is what's called equitable distribution, which means fair, not necessarily 50-50, division of the assets. And to do that, courts are supposed to analyze all the contributions to the marriage.
And they have a framework for this, right? The 4 quadrants.
They do. It's a conceptual framework designed to capture every kind of effort or harm within the marriage.
So walk us through them. How is this supposed to quantify my mentor's 20 years of work or a stay-at-home parent sacrifice?
Yeah. Okay, so quadrant 1 is positive monetary contributions. This is the easy one. Earned income, bonuses, rental income, all the cash that flowed into the marriage.
Straightforward.
Quadrant 2 is positive non-monetary contributions. This is where the caretaking and support are supposed to be valued. It's childcare, cooking, managing the household, and, critically, supporting the other spouse in their professional endeavors.
Ah, so that's the one. That's how they're supposed to value the spouse who stayed home so the other one could build a career.
It's the mechanism, yes, though it's often applied imperfectly. Then you have the negatives. Quadrant 3 is negative monetary contributions. This is spending marital money in a way that hurts the marriage, gambling, drug use, spending a fortune on an affair partner, asset dissipation.
And last one.
Quadrant 4 is negative non-monetary contributions. This is behavior that wrecks the relationship without a direct financial cost. Things like abuse or just the time spent with an affair partner instead of with the family.
On paper, that seems like a pretty comprehensive system. It's supposed to weigh a career sacrifice against a gambling habit. And yet we still see these massive economic gaps.
The persistence of that gap is what led scholars to think the problem wasn't just undervaluing female roles. They started to suspect something deeper was going on, something unconscious and systemic, gender bias in how the law is actually applied.
And this is where the really revolutionary research comes in, the experiment that actually isolated and measured this hidden bias.
It's a critical study. They set up a vignette experiment with over 3,000 people acting as mock judges or mediators. They had to divide a hypothetical $2 million marital estate.
And the genius was how they set up the scenario.
Exactly. They used control scenarios where they just flipped the gender roles. In one, you had the traditional male breadwinner, female caretaker. In the other, a female breadwinner, male caretaker. Every other detail income, years married, effort was identical. Only the gender was swapped.
And the first thing they found was a bias towards the breadwinner, which you'd sort of expect.
Yeah, that was confirmed. The he who earns it owns it norm is powerful. Subjects rewarded the breadwinner regardless of gender, with about 15 percentage points more of the assets, about $300,000 in the scenario. Money talks.
But the real bombshell was the gender penalty, the financial penalty that was applied specifically to the woman no matter which role she played.
This was the stunning part. Subjects consistently favored the man, even when he was the stay-at-home dad. The numbers were stark. Male breadwinners were awarded, on average, $92,600 more than female breadwinners.
Wow.
And conversely, male caretakers were awarded $92,600 more than female caretakers.
That is just astonishing. So whether she was the high-powered lawyer paying the bills or the dedicated mom who sacrificed her career, she was consistently penalized almost $100,000 compared to a man who did the exact same job.
The data strongly suggests an internalized societal bias that just assigns more intrinsic value to a man's efforts, whether that effort is in the office or in the home. And it wasn't just the male subjects. Female subjects also penalized the female spouse, which suggests this bias is just deeply embedded in our culture.
So this $92,600 penalty, that's the silent mechanism that helps explain why that economic disparity just won't go away, even when you try to account for everything else.
It's a non-monetary, non-fault factor that consistently skews the outcome. The discretion that's built into these equitable distribution systems just leaves the door wide open for this unconscious bias to creep in.
The experiment also found something else about human intuition, about our desire to assign blame, even in a no-fault system.
Yes. In the scenarios, subjects were explicitly told it was a no-fault divorce, but they were also given details that hinted at blame, like one partner gained a lot of weight and the other one filed for divorce because of it.
And people just couldn't ignore that, could they?
They couldn't. Despite the no-fault instruction, they showed a strong desire to assign blame and enforce some kind of moral justice. And they consistently punished the person who filed for divorce. That party was docked between 6 and 8 percentage points of the assets.
So they didn't punish the person whose behavior might have caused the breakdown. They punished the person who initiated the end.
Exactly, which is a fundamental disconnect. The legal system is trying to be clean and transactional, but our human intuition still demands a moral accounting. It's almost tragic, this ingrained desire to punish the person who had the courage or desperation to actually end the marriage.
Okay, so if the whole system is this flawed, if it allows for this much unconscious bias to punish women, what can be done? What are the proposed fixes?
The researchers suggested 3 main reforms, all aimed at reducing the huge amount of discretion that judges and mediators have.
Yeah.
Because that's where the bias thrives.
What's the first one?
The first one targets the mindset of the decision maker. It's called empathy induction. This would require judges or mediators to literally pause and deliberately imagine themselves in the shoes of each spouse. Or they'd have to reflect on what the outcome would be if the genders were reversed.
Just to force them to confront their own latent biases.
Exactly. The second idea is institutional. It's called auditing. This would mean systematically reviewing big samples of judicial decisions to look for patterns.
And if you find a judge who always favors one gender,
they're demonstrably biased and would need retraining or some other intervention. It's about correcting bad actors after the fact.
And the final proposal is seen as the most powerful one. It changes the starting point.
That's the presumption of equality. This is the big one. It would introduce a mandatory 50-50 starting point, an anchor for dividing assets. And crucially, any deviation from that 50-50 split would require a written justification with documented facts to support it.
So it forces them to show their work.
It forces them to confront any potential bias before they disproportionately reward one party. And based on the data, this would overwhelmingly counteract the penalty that's currently being applied to the female spouse. So we started this deep dive with this deep tension between these ancient, almost primal theories of utility and the very painful modern reality of partnership. Bruffault's law, for all its academic flaws, it does hold a mirror up to the cynical reality that value is constantly being reassessed in economic terms.
And the empirical data backs that up. It confirms that stability is genuinely threatened when those traditional male provider roles are challenged. The gender revolution is structurally unfinished.
It is, and yet when these relationships end, these cold economic equations crash right into a legal system that we now see as neither fair nor impartial. That massive economic disadvantage women face is not just from losing career capital, it's compounded by a hidden systemic gender bias that penalizes the female partner, no matter what she did, high earner or dedicated caretaker.
The penalty is just for being female.
It seems to be. Now let's go back to your mentor, the man who asked, "Doesn't my history count for anything?" From a biological utility standpoint, his history didn't count. His current ability to provide, or lack thereof, just superseded 20 years of past provision.
Economically, the loss of his provider status was the trigger for the instability.
Right. But here's the final brutal irony. In the final assessment, the legal division, even if he had been the one who sacrificed his career to stay home, the system, because of that $92,600 gender penalty, would likely have been unconsciously biased in his favor.
This whole deep dive just reveals that the stability of a partnership, it relies so much less on simple loyalty or goodwill, and so much more on navigating these incredibly complex, often contradictory forces of biology, economic reality, and this unconscious social judgment that is baked right into our legal system. The fundamental truth we've extracted here is that in the modern relationship, value is relentlessly, constantly reassessed. And that assessment is rarely, if ever, truly impartial.